Alaskan Guide, Trapper and Monster Hunter, Part 2, written by SledDogGuy. I pulled into the little mountain town at about 10:30 a.m. I looked at the thermostat on the dash of the new Dodge. It read a bone-chilling -24 below. I pulled into the nearly abandoned campground and I found the 5 Arctic-grade tents that I had recommended for this hunt. Me, Shelby, Jake, and Sarah would all get one of the 4 smaller private tents for ourselves. Agent Jones would stay in the larger tent. That would also double as a headquarters and a cafeteria for this hunt. I unloaded the Huskies out of the custom-built dog box on the back of the Dodge, and I set up a lean-to structure that would serve as their house for the next couple of weeks. I then made my way to the headquarters tent, and I checked the fire burning in the wood-burning stove. It was nearly out. I mentally questioned my team's basic winter survival abilities while I patiently built a roaring fire to warm the tent. I was enjoying the warmth of the fire when I heard the black SUV pull into the campsite. "Whoa, nice ride," Jake commented on the new truck. "I thought you drove an old Ford," Sarah questioned. "I did," I replied while looking sharply at Jones. Jake, putting 2 and 2 together, jokingly questioned, "You bought him a new truck? Where's my bonus?" Jones, always serious, answered, We needed dogs and, another musher with security clearance. Where are we gonna find him?" Shelby then broke into our conversation. "Come on, the pizza's getting cold," he said. We went inside and ate. Then Jones broke the small talk. We all knew why we were here, but Jones finally explained in detail what had happened. It turns out that a group of 5 snowmobilers had gone into the backcountry for a weekend trip. They were found dead the following Tuesday. Or, I should say, what was left of them was found dead. The bodies were severely mutilated, eaten by some strange beast. The bodies were found in their campsite, which had been completely trashed by whatever had done this. All 5 of the snowmobiles were found at the campsite unharmed, in operating condition. This meant that whatever had happened, it had happened so fast that they couldn't run to where their machines were to escape. There weren't any tracks to be found, due to the wind having blown away the tracks. The locals had removed the bodies, but they had not disturbed anything else. So, we decided to head to the scene of the crime early the next morning to assess the situation properly. At daybreak, I hitched the team's dogs to the 4 dog sleds that I had brought with me. 2 were racing-style sleds to be used to move quickly if needed. They're nicknamed the Corvette sleds by Jake. Then there was a large freighting-style sled for moving bulk gear. He calls that the trucker sled. And finally, a multi-passenger touring-style sled, which Jake calls the station wagon. I gave everyone a crash course in dog mushing and assigned everyone to a sled. I was to lead the way on a Corvette sled, followed by Jake on the trucker sled. Then Jones and Shelby would be on the station wagon, and finally Sarah would be in the rear on the other Corvette sled. The trip was pure hell for me. Jake complained constantly about not getting a Corvette sled, and Jones couldn't keep from falling off. Shelby grumbled nonstop about the cold. In fact, the only person who seemingly enjoyed the trip was Sarah, who learned the difficult task of steering the sled with ease. She never once complained. She was pretty impressive for a rookie musher, and I'm not easily impressed. We arrived at the murder scene after a couple of hours. They had picked a good spot for a camp. It was surrounded on 3 sides by trees, but it was still in the heart of the mountains. It was the perfect riding country. I quickly surveyed the small campsite. There were 3 small Arctic-grade tents equipped with small propane heaters for warmth. Apparently, the victims had been a group of 2 women and 3 men. The tents were collapsed from the snowstorm on the night of the murder. But upon entering the last semi-standing tent, I found about a dozen beer cans scattered across the floor, with another 12-pack in the corner. I kicked around in the snow and I found the remains of a campfire. It had burned to nothing but ashes, telling me that it had burned out on its own and was not put out. So the campers must have been awake at the start of the attack. Jones approached me. "What do you think happened?" Whatever it was hit so hard and fast that they couldn't even get to their snowmobiles. And it didn't help that these folks were probably drunk, sitting around a campfire and not paying much attention. After a brief silence, Jones spoke up. "I've got a couple of things to fill out here. I want to take some pictures too of the scene." I thought that this was the best thing to do and responded, "Okay, I'm gonna go and search around over there in the trees. The wind wouldn't have hit them so badly and maybe I can find some tracks." The group of trees was roughly 1,000 yards up the mountain to the north, further away from the town in the valley below. It was the most likely spot for an animal to retreat to. Jones looked at the trees and replied, "Those trees look a good distance away. Take your radio and Jake." I nodded in agreement and found Jake was sitting on one of the dog sleds already. "Hey Jake, you want to take a look up there in that group of trees?" I said, motioning towards the aforementioned trees. He slowly rose from his seat, glanced up at the trees, and then said, "Sure, I guess." "You got your rifle?" I said casually. "Nah, I left it back in my tent," he answered. "You got a sidearm?" I questioned, hoping he wouldn't have been foolish enough to come to the backcountry completely unarmed. "Yeah, I got my Glock," he answered. "Okay, do you carry a .40 Smith & Wesson or a .45 APC?" I curiously replied, slightly relieved that I had his weapon with him. "It's a 9x19 Parabellum. What about you?" he asked. 9mm? What are you gonna do with a 9mm? I asked, quite aggravated. "What do you mean?" he asked, completely bewildered. "I mean, we're not fighting people. Whatever we're out here hunting ripped apart 5 people before any one of them could do a thing about it. And you think that you're going to put what did that down with something that takes multiple shots to kill a person?" I stated, now quite angry at his ignorance. He returned my anger in kind. "Oh, go to hell, Josh. Who do you think you are anyway? I'll carry whatever I please. You like to walk around like you're in charge or something, but hear me now. You ain't my superior." For a moment, I considered knocking his teeth out for his ignorance and attitude. But before I could act, Jones stepped between us. "Settle down, you two," he said angrily. "I didn't put this team together to fight against ourselves," he shouted. Pausing for a moment, he continued, "Shelby, why don't you go with Josh?" "No, I'll go," Jake responded. Jones looked at me for confirmation and I just nodded. "Go ahead, Jake, and jump on Sarah's Corvette sled. The snow is hard up top, but icy. We'll have to put booties on the dogs to protect their feet," I directed Jake. He nodded once in confirmation. I quickly put the booties on the dogs and looked up to see Jake on the runners of his sled, and off we went. We arrived at the tree line and quickly anchored off the dogs. I walked over to help Jake, and I saw a small speck of blood on the leader's paw. I also noticed that one of her booties was missing. I swore at him in aggravation. "What?" Jake asked. Upon closer inspection, I found that he had put several booties on wrong so that they could easily fall off. "You put the booties on wrong," I answered. "Well, excuse me," Jake said sarcastically. I shook my head and replied, "I think that I'll fix it would have worked better." "Kiss my ass," was his reply. I started to head into the woods and he soon started to follow. We searched for a couple of hours in an uneasy silence until I found a track. "What in God's name is that from?" he asked. I don't know," I said. The track was about 2 feet long and 1 foot wide. It had long toes which ended in 6-inch claws. The tracks were fresh, fresher than they should have been. "They're heading north," I said, "but I want to see where they came from. Follow the tracks backwards to find out," I told Jake. "Sure," he answered. "Oh, and take my rifle. I wouldn't want this thing to shove that 9mm of yours up your ass," I mocked. "Ha ha, funny," he replied, obviously annoyed. I began following the tracks northward, chuckling lightly to myself. What kind of fool comes up here with a pea shooter? Jake didn't strike me as an idiot, but now I found myself questioning my teammate. Even if he carried a small pistol and an adequate rifle, he would at least be able to walk safely. But no, the dumbass left his rifle at camp. So now I'm left with nothing but my .45 Colt, which is quite adequate, but it lacked the range and sheer knockdown power of my .45-70. My internal rant was interrupted by the slightest of movements out of the corner of my eye. I quickly spun towards it, crouched, and focused my sight on it. The beast was climbing up a steep bluff 250 yards to my 10 o'clock. It was too far away to accurately tell, but it looked to be at least 10 to 14 feet tall, with what looked like 3-foot antlers growing from its head. It finally reached a small ledge and then stood, looking back on the valley below him. I slowly pulled my pistol from its holster, knowing that it would be useless at this range, but the familiar weight of it in my hand was reassuring. The beast luckily did not see me and then turned and ducked into a low cave. I quickly made my way back down the mountain with extra caution. Finally, I made my way to the 2 parked dog teams, where Jake was waiting for me. "Where have you been?" he questioned me, handing me back my rifle. "I saw it," I replied. "Seen what?" he asked with curiosity. "Hell if I know," I replied. We quickly readied the dogs and made our way to the ruined campsite where everyone had been waiting. Upon our arrival, Jones started to question us. "Did you two get lost?" "No, we found something," I replied. "Found what?" he asked. "Tracks coming from the ridge," Jake answered, pointing to a tall bluff about a mile to the west. "The tracks were fresh, only about an hour or 2 old," I replied. My guess is you've followed them," Jones asked me. "Yeah, I followed them," I answered. "What did you find?" he asked again. "Well, I really don't know," I answered. He nodded quickly. "Sarah!" he yelled. I quickly described the creature to Sarah while we packed up our gear to go. I answered any and all of the questions that she had. Then we quickly returned to our campsite. I started a fire in Jones' tent. No one else could. And Sarah started to research what I had seen. I decided to ask Jake more about what he had seen. "Hey, Jake, you mentioned that you followed the tracks that led to that ridge. What can you tell me about them?" I asked. "Yeah, those tracks led me right to the ridge and, well, it looked to me like it was, well, watching," he answered. "Watching us? Huh. It must be pretty smart then," I stated. "I wonder why, though?" Jake asked, to no one in particular. "Well, when wolves return to a kill, they sit back and watch before they come back in on the carcass, just to make sure that nothing has been disturbed. If they see that something's wrong, they'll leave it alone. It's too risky for them, I answered. Yeah, if this is anything, it's smart, Sarah commented as she re-entered the tent. What do you have on it? I questioned. It's pretty scary. From what you described to me, I think it's what they call a Wendigo, Sarah answered. What's a Wendigo? Jones asked. Well, I've heard a little from some of the native guides. They say that a Wendigo is like a spirit of the forest or something. They say that a Wendigo represents the evil of cannibalism. That if a person eats another, they become a Wendigo. They say that a Wendigo can drive a man mad and then possess him, making him crave human flesh. Wendigo often can represent extreme hunger, cold, and any sort of evil, really. But I was always told that it was just a legend, I said to the group. But our buddy didn't possess anyone, and nobody ate no one, so that doesn't cover it, Shelby pointed out. Science tells us that most legends are really just exaggerated versions of the truth, Sarah said. From what I've learned, they are a lot like the Yeti, but a thinner, taller version, she added. So they're Bigfoot's Eskimo cousin? Jake asked assuredly. Yeah, pretty much, Sarah confirmed. So how do we trap it? Jones asked. Well, it's a cave-dwelling creature. So the thing to do is to wait until it leaves its cave, set your trap in the cave, and then simply wait for it to return. But there's one problem though, I stated. What is it? Asked Jones. That cave trap method. It works with a bear or a wolf when they leave to go hunting. But this thing, well, it leaves to hunt people, I answered. Okay, we'll close the whole area to people. We'll blame it on avalanche danger or something, Jones said. Josh, draw up some design for a trap. I'll have a local start building it immediately. Then I need you to head out to the back country and tell everyone to go home. I don't need anyone else getting killed. Oh, and take someone with you. He issued me the order and I simply nodded my head and went to work. It was a good plan. I drew up an easy design for a large cage trap and I sent Jones on his way. I thought about who to take and quickly decided on Sarah, as she was the best musher on our team, making for a much quicker trip. Sarah, are you busy? I asked. No, not really. Why? She answered. I need someone that can actually ride a sled to help me evacuate the area. I was wondering if you would come, I said. Sure, let me grab my gear, she said. She went into her tent and re-emerged a few minutes later with winter gear and a pistol on her hip. What are you carrying? I asked. Oh, it's just my dad's old .357 mag, she answered nonchalantly. I smirked to myself as we headed out, knowing that Jake would be embarrassed to know that even inexperienced Sarah knew to carry a large pistol. We searched the surrounding Maine countryside. We found a few different groups of snowmobilers and we sent them home. Some gave us trouble, but no one argued once I showed them my FBI badge that Jones had supplied to me. But things took a drastic turn when we were on our way back to camp. We were mushing along a trail that ran on top of a steep bluff that sloped down into a heavily forested valley and eventually to a frozen river. That is where we saw it. The beast was following the river north, the opposite direction that we were traveling. I stopped the team and anchored the still fresh dogs off to a tree nearby. I quietly instructed Sarah to do the same. Did you see it? She whispered. Yeah, I responded, pointing at it through the various trees. I retrieved my rifle and my binoculars from the sled bag to try to get a better view. As I said, the creature was heading north along the river, so I figured that it was probably leaving its den. as its den was located to the southwest of our position. It was probably hungry and looking for food. "You got your phone?" I asked. "Yeah," Sarah answered. "Call Jake and Shelby. Tell them to haul ass out here," I commanded. "What about Jones?" she asked. "Call him after Jake," I answered. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "This thing is killing and eating people. I've got no choice," I answered. She shook her head slightly in approval, although I knew that she was disappointed. "I know," she sighed. I quickly found the creature in the valley below. It was still oblivious to our presence. The wind was coming from the northwest and was definitely in my favor. I strapped on my snowshoes and began descending down the cliff. I made my way down along the river and silently started north. When I last saw the beast, it was a little over a mile ahead of me. But because the snow was deep and it was moving slowly, much slower than me with my snowshoes, I was catching up. It took me over an hour, and it was almost dark when I found it. It had stopped at an unfrozen spot of the river to get a drink when I spotted it. So I silently laid on the ground and slowly crawled through the snow. The snow's cold, stinging my face. I reached a nearby ice-covered log. I steadied my rifle on the log, taking aim. Then slowly, cocking the rifle's hammer with a metallic click. The beast must have heard the click because it suddenly turned and stood just as I fired. The bullet hit the animal in the upper hip, knocking it to the ground on its stomach. The creature let out a pained howl, and it struggled fruitlessly to get to its feet. I rose from my shooting position and approached the beast, intending to put the thing down out of its misery. Just as I shouldered the rifle and worked its lever, I heard Sarah scream, "Wait!" she yelled. I turned and looked down the river to see Jake and Sarah about 100 yards away, approaching quickly on the station wagon. They pulled up beside me and stopped the sled. "Tranq darts," Jake said, holding up an air-powered dart gun. He walked over and shot the animal with one, and within a couple of minutes, it was out like a light. "D'you think it'll live?" Jake asked. "It should. I shot it in the hip," I answered. "Yeah, about that," Jake said, smirking. "Hey, it moved at the last second," I explained. "Uh-huh," Jake answered, still smirking. "Hey, at least I brought my rifle," I retorted with my own smirk. "Okay, fine," Jake said, chuckling slightly. "How are we going to get this thing out of here?" I wondered out loud. "Jones is on his way with a helicopter and some agents. They'll take it from here," Sarah answered. 2 hours later, I was helping to load the still sleeping cryptid into the back of a semi-truck to be hauled to, well, who knows where. After we finished up, Jones approached me. "You did another excellent job here, Josh," he complimented. "I'm just doing my job," I answered. "So, I can count on you for more hunts in the future?" he asked. I looked at him and answered, "Yeah, of course. Anytime."